My name is Emily Hartman, 34, and I own a small vintage gallery in the Pearl District of Portland, Oregon. To outsiders, my life seems ordinary. I wear faded cardigans, drive a 15-year-old Honda Civic, and spend my days cleaning objects most people call junk. But to my family, I'm the disappointment. A single woman with no children, no high-powered job, and certainly no Ivy League degree to brag about during holidays. My father, Mr. Hartman, once managed a regional insurance office and believed your net worth defined your character. My mother, Carol, was an elementary school principal, convinced success came from the right school, the right spouse, and the right career. Their pride and joy, my brother Daniel, was the perfect example. He graduated from Yale, became a corporate lawyer in New York, married a pediatric cardiologist, and sent his twin daughters to private school, where they learned Mandarin before second grade. Their holiday cards looked like advertisements, matching sweaters, perfect smiles, and staged joy. And me? I studied cultural heritage at the University of Oregon. While Daniel stood in courtrooms, I sat in archives, researching furniture styles and antique finishes. Art is lovely, my mother once said, but it doesn't pay bills. I still remember how her shoulders drooped when she closed my college acceptance letter. After graduating, I worked 4 years as an assistant in an appraisal firm, learning to tell true mahogany from veneer and how to spot genuine antique hardware. Once, I came home excited about a lamp I'd discovered undervalued by $4,000, 0 cents. My father just muttered, "Sounds risky." At 27, I used my savings, borrowed a little from an old roommate, and rented a narrow shop on Everett Street. I called it Hartman and Heritage, arranging every piece like it belonged in a museum. On opening day, my mother brought a plastic-wrapped bouquet and whispered to my aunt, "Hopefully she grows out of this before she's 30. From then on, I was the side note at every holiday gathering. Each Christmas, Daniel starred as the brilliant lawyer and perfect father. Meanwhile, I got asked if the shop was still open or if I'd tried substitute teaching. What they never knew was that every piece I sold was a piece of history brought back to life. A sterling Art Deco tea set once kept me awake all night, terrified I'd misjudged its value. A 19th century music box I quietly sold made a woman cry when it played the tune her grandmother used to hum in 1945. People only saw tarnish. They never saw the history. But the hardest part wasn't their dismissal. It was feeling like I'd never be enough. No matter how hard I worked, I stayed Emily, the odd one out, unmarried, without an Ivy League degree, leaving my mother nothing flashy to share at her Saturday coffee circle. Eventually, I accepted my supporting role. At least from there, I was left alone. I never told anyone, not even my closest friend, that one of the first things I sold at Hartman and Heritage secretly opened a new world for me. It was an early 20th century French mantel clock I found buried in a storage unit outside Portland. The owner just wanted it gone, and I bought it for $45, 0 cents. After carefully cleaning grime, oiling gears, and researching the faded markings, I discovered it was made by L. Le Royency, custom built for a French diplomat under Napoleon III. 3 months later, it sold at auction in San Francisco for $52,000, 0 cents. I didn't spend a dime. Instead, I opened a private investment account under my business entity, separating personal and company assets. That's when I realized my passion wasn't just sentimental, it could build real wealth. I didn't need my family's approval. I needed knowledge, patience, and the ability to see treasures where others saw clutter. I started getting up at dawn on weekends, driving to estate sales all over Oregon and Washington, especially in old neighborhoods and coastal towns. Many wealthy families in places like Astoria or Tacoma had no idea how to value family heirlooms when downsizing. Armed with a notebook and a portable scanner, I taught myself to spot authentic details, real dovetail joints, genuine arts and crafts engravings instead of cheap reproductions. One of my favorite finds was in Seattle. An elderly couple was selling their father's library. Tucked among the books was a rare woodblock print, an 1837 original annotated by a British historian who chronicled the War of 1812. I paid $150, 0 cents for the whole box. 6 months later, after verifying the signature, The print sold to a museum for $215,000, 0 cents. A few big wins each year, combined with steady smaller sales, allowed my portfolio to grow quietly. I kept nothing under my own name. Instead, I formed an LLC called Evergreen Holdings, and eventually bought the building where my gallery stands. Not just the gallery, but all 4 loft apartments above it, the office next door, and the parking lot behind the alley. I owned it all under Evergreen Holdings, the LLC my family didn't know existed. They still thought I was scraping by, keeping the gallery open for fun, and I let them believe it. I lived simply, because I chose to. Most of my wardrobe was vintage treasures found for $20 at Portland flea markets, some stitched from century-old French jacquard. My car was an old Honda Civic, but well-maintained, filled with the scent of old books and road trips. I didn't buy expensive wine, but I did own a set of baccarat crystal glasses I'd rescued from a pawn shop for next to nothing. Every year I traveled to Europe, officially for buying trips, but really to wander museums in Florence, browse quiet bookshops in Bruges, or stroll rain-soaked Paris streets watching lamplights shimmer on wet cobblestones. I had nothing to prove to anyone. On Thanksgiving, I arrived at my mother's Portland bungalow around noon, carrying a homemade pumpkin pie and a polished set of antique silver spoons. Each year, I brought Daniel a small gift with some historical significance. Each year, he set it aside with barely a glance, then launched into stories of court victories or ski trips to Aspen. My mother's house looked the same: trimmed shrubs, hydrangeas out front, rooms smelling of roasting turkey and sage. Daniel was already there. His sleek black SUV filled the driveway, so I parked down the street, leaves crunching under my shoes. "Well, look who's here," Daniel said as I came in. "Good thing you didn't keep the gallery open today, huh, Emily?" I just smiled. I'd left my new assistant running the shop, but Daniel wouldn't understand delegation. To him, if you weren't chained to a desk, you weren't working. In the kitchen, Mom handed me a bag of Yukon Gold potatoes. "Can you peel these, sweetheart? Your brother's handling the carving." I sat at the table, quietly peeling potatoes, just as I did every year. Dad came in, bourbon glass in hand, beaming at Daniel while barely glancing at me. "How's the gallery, Emily? Still open?" "Same as always, Dad," I said. Dad turned back to Daniel's talk of court cases. Mom ladled gravy, smiling proudly. By 3, we all gathered at the table, bathed in warm light and the scent of Thanksgiving dinner. Everything seemed like any other year until Daniel said, "Where's my phone? Battery must have died." I glanced over. My phone sat on the kitchen counter where I'd left it while rinsing cranberries. Before I could move, Daniel grabbed it, swiped the screen and scanned my notifications. A second later, his face turned pale, his voice cut through the cozy kitchen. "What the hell is this, Emily?" The room fell silent. He held my phone up like a smoking gun. The screen glowed bright. Notification from Ryan, my financial advisor, was visible. "Congrats, your net worth just hit $15,200,000, 0 cents. Let's meet next week to discuss new investments." Dad slammed his bourbon glass down, splashing liquid over the tablecloth. Mom stared at me, eyes wide. Daniel looked at me as if I'd confessed to a crime, clutching my phone like evidence. "You've got to be kidding me," he snapped. $15 million? You? That little gallery made all that?" I stood and reached out my hand. "Give me my phone, Daniel." He pulled back, eyes blazing. "No, explain this. Where did the money come from? Are you laundering money, doing something shady? Because if you are, you're dragging the family into it." "Nothing illegal," I said calmly. "Every dollar is mine. It came from the work you've always dismissed as playing with old junk." Dad's voice was shaky. "Is this real, Emily? You really have that kind of money?" I nodded. The room seemed frozen. A minute ago, we were talking about stuffing. Now it felt like a courtroom. Daniel shook his head. "All these years you let everyone think you were broke. Mom worried about your future. Dad kept asking if you wanted to teach. And meanwhile, you've been sitting on millions?" Mom whispered, almost to herself. "She wears old sweaters, buys used books for the kids, drives that old Honda, and she's a millionaire." I took my phone gently and slipped it into my pocket. "No one ever asked. No one really listened when I talked about my work. I wasn't hiding anything. You just never cared. Unless it was about Daniel. Daniel gave a short, bitter laugh. Well, great, now we know. We're going to have a lot to talk about after dinner. As I looked around the table, from Dad's wary eyes to the tight line in Mom's brow, I knew dinner was far from over. We ate in silence. The turkey went cold on our plates. The gravy thickened into a brown paste. No one touched Mom's famous roasted sweet potatoes. Conversation had been replaced by one number flashing in everyone's minds. $15,200,000, 0 cents. No one congratulated me. No one recognized the years I'd worked alone. Instead, there was just silence and calculations behind guarded looks. Of course, Daniel was first to speak. He set down his fork and said, voice gentle but edged, "You know, Emily, Olivia has this chance to study art in Paris. It's a huge opportunity, but the tuition and living costs are sky high. If you helped, it would change everything." I met his eyes. "Are you asking me for money?" "It's not asking," Daniel replied coolly. "We're family. You have it. We need it. Call it fair." Dad nodded like that made sense. Mom sipped water and added softly, "You live alone, no kids, no daycare bills. Helping your family wouldn't be a burden, would it, sweetheart?" Before I could answer, Daniel's wife, Julia, jumped in. Usually quiet, but not today. "The truth is," Julia said, folding her arms, "you've got millions just sitting there while Daniel's juggling tuition, a mortgage, and everyday bills. Emily, you shop vintage, drive an old Civic, live in a small loft. Do you really need all that money?" I set my fork down. "So because I live simply, I don't deserve what I've earned?" Julia shrugged. "All I'm saying is, if you're not using it, someone else should." I kept my voice steady. "What about the years I spent learning, the risks I took, the hours working when you all mocked my dusty antique thing? Now because one number pops up, you think you're entitled to a share?" Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Do you even realize how much we worried? Mom lost sleep thinking you couldn't pay insurance. You owe us some honesty." I gave a soft laugh. "That's rich. For years, none of you cared about my work. Not once did Mom or Dad visit my gallery after opening day. Every time I shared news about an antique, you brushed me off. And now suddenly I owe you something?" Mom's voice turned firm. "If you're as curious as my family now is about what I'll say next, make sure to subscribe and follow my story, because the real reckoning is just about to begin." "We're not pressuring you, sweetheart," Mom said gently. "We're just suggesting you use your good fortune to help those close to you." I looked around the table. Everyone stared at me like I was a wallet with a pulse. 1 minute passed, then 2. Finally, Daniel spoke again, his voice soft but precise. "I'm only asking for Olivia. Maybe a small scholarship fund. You could even put your name on it. One small gesture could change her entire future." "And after that?" I asked. "Then it'll be your mortgage, then Dad's roof repairs, then Mom's health fund. What am I supposed to be? A bank? An ATM with a family name?" Julia sighed, looking irritated for the first time all evening. "Emily, don't be dramatic. You don't have to give everything. Just maybe $3 million. That still leaves you $12 million to enjoy." I turned to Dad, who had barely spoken. "What do you think, Dad?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Your mother's right. We're not forcing you. But remember, we all thought about helping you when you were struggling. Now it's your turn to help back." I nodded slowly, a hollow feeling opening in my chest. I'd expected shock. I didn't expect applause, but I'd hoped for at least some recognition that I'd earned it. Instead, they looked at me like a number in a ledger. No one asked what I'd learned. No one cared what I wanted. They calculated, divided, and called it love. I glanced at the clock, nearly 4 p.m. "I need some air," I said, pushing my chair back. "Emily," Mom called after me, "don't leave in the middle of dinner." I turned around, my voice low and clear. "I'm not leaving. I'm reclaiming the boundaries this family just tried to cross." Then I stepped outside into the cold, coatless, letting Portland's sharp November wind sting my face. For the first time in my life, everything felt clear. I stood on the porch, fingers gripping the railing, breath fogging in the chilly air. Inside, the clinking of cutlery and hushed voices sounded more like a boardroom than a family dinner. I took a deep breath, steadying my heart. 10 minutes later, I walked back into the dining room. Before anyone else decides how to spend my bank account, I said evenly, I need to make one thing absolutely clear. All three of them turned to look at me like I was some insolent student daring to challenge the teacher mid-lecture. My money didn't come from luck, I said evenly. No one in this room was there when I started out. None of you showed up when I was hauling dusty furniture at 6 in the morning or coming home after 12-hour days surrounded by mildew and splinters. So why does anyone here think they have a say in how I spend it? Daniel leaned back in his chair, arms folded. I'm not saying you didn't work hard, Emily, but if you truly love this family, then helping shouldn't feel like such a burden. I gave a tight smile. I don't lack love. I lack mutual respect. Dad put his bourbon down again, his fingers trembling slightly. Your mother worried about you for years. We had no idea you'd been saving that much. That's because none of you wanted to know, I replied. Every time I talked about my work, someone changed the subject or said, hang in there. No one ever believed I could actually succeed. Julia, pulling out her phone as if to check figures, spoke with a low, sharp tone. The issue isn't that you have money, Emily. It's that you hid it. It feels like betrayal. I nodded slowly. If anyone in this house knows what betrayal feels like, it's me. Daniel slammed his palm on the table. Enough! You can't stand there pretending to be righteous while refusing to help your own niece. I'm not refusing to help, I said calmly. Helping is when someone asks with respect. This, I gestured around the table, is a demand. A guilt trip wrapped in entitlement. Mom's eyes welled with tears. You're tearing this family apart over money. You live alone. No husband. No kids. What are you going to do with that much money your whole life? Her words cut deep. I'm going to live the way I want, I said, voice rough. And if that embarrasses you, I'll carry that burden. Daniel stood abruptly, scraping his chair back. If you leave here without agreeing to help, don't expect things to stay the same. Don't expect birthday invites. Don't expect to come to Olivia's graduation. I stared at him. You're using your kids to bargain with me? This isn't bargaining, it's consequence. I walked toward the door and grabbed my coat from the hook. My hands were shaking from cold and fury, but my voice stayed steady. I'm not saying no because I'm selfish. I'm saying no because I've learned the most expensive lesson of my life. Never let people decide your worth. If they only see it once, it turns into money. Dad called after me as I left. You'll regret this. Sooner or later, being alone catches up with you. I glanced back. I still have family, just not here. And I shut the door behind me. I stepped out into the Portland twilight, my thin coat useless against the sharp November cold. My hands were freezing, but inside I felt strangely clear. No more tense dinners, whispered gossip, or calculating stares from my brother and his wife. No more vague comments pretending to be concerned. Just the echo of my own footsteps along the brick sidewalks. Firm, solid, growing lighter with each step, like stones lifting off my shoulders. Back at Hartman and Heritage, I didn't turn on the lights immediately. I went upstairs to my small loft and sat by the window. From there, I could watch Everett Street as the neon signs flickered to life. Soft jazz floated up from the cafe on the corner. Everything looked the same, but I had changed. I checked my phone. A text from Mom. You hurt us, but I still love you. Nothing from Daniel. I wasn't waiting for it. I silenced my phone, not to avoid anything, but as a reminder that the voices that matter aren't the ones wrapped in guilt or sarcasm. The next morning, I opened the gallery early, not to sell, but to clean, to wipe away every trace of the previous day. Being treated like a family investment made me crave order, both in my shop and in my heart. The room went quiet for a moment, the soft ticking of the vintage wall clock filling the silence. Then Dad straightened, set down his tea, and said slowly, "We were wrong to believe you had to follow Daniel's path to be successful. I thought it was safer that way." "I understand," I said, my voice steady, "but I need you to understand this too. I don't need praise. I just want to be seen as enough." Mom didn't say anything. She only nodded, a small, almost imperceptible nod, but it was there. Around 7 that evening, I walked them out. I stood on the porch, watching their silver sedan disappear around the corner. No tears, no old ache, just one truth. I didn't need them to become the parents I once wished for. But I'd chosen to speak, not stay silent. I'd held my boundary, and I'd kept compassion from turning into negotiation. Later, back at Hartman and Heritage, I sat among the antiques, in a room where time wasn't discarded but preserved with care. I opened my journal and wrote my final thought for the day. For the first time, Thanksgiving wasn't a test. It was just dinner between 3 people, and I didn't have to ask permission to be myself. Maybe my family will never fully understand me, but they no longer have the power to define me. Emily's story is a reminder that true worth doesn't come from family praise or society's approval, but from the courage to live with purpose and protect personal boundaries. In a world obsessed with titles and degrees, she chose a quieter, meaningful path and built a life with her own hands. Would you have made the same choice in Emily's shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories about courage, family, and finding your own path. Jasmine, the college student I'd hired 3 months earlier, came in around 8 a.m., holding a cappuccino, her brow creased with worry. "Are you okay? I texted you yesterday but didn't hear back." I smiled and took the warm cup. "Better than you'd think. And thank you for checking on me." Hiring Jasmine was one of my best decisions this year. 23, passionate about antique textiles, obsessed with Victorian embroidery, and blessed with something I once lacked, mentorship. Now, I'm the mentor. In the weeks that followed, I poured myself into my gallery. I launched a blog series on American wood furniture from the 18th to early 20th centuries. Traffic soared, and collectors started sending thank you notes. One even asked to apprentice with me. I began hosting monthly talk and tea events, inviting customers, neighbors, and students. We gathered among antiques, sipping mint tea and sharing stories. A Civil War-era oak mirror, crystal goblets, forgotten in a Charleston cargo hold. At those gatherings, no one asked how much money I had. Instead, they asked, "Did this box belong to anyone famous?" Or, "How can you tell hand-stitching from machine work?" They cared about history, not price tags. One afternoon, while packing a delicate vase headed to California, an email pinged in. A small museum in Seattle wanted to collaborate on a workshop about colonial furniture making. My name had been recommended by a university professor I'd once helped authenticate a 19th century dining set. That's when it hit me. I was no longer living in my brother Daniel's shadow. I was my own person with a voice and community. On a crisp December night, I locked up Hartman and Heritage and crossed Everett Street to the bakery, where Mrs. Marie, the 68-year-old owner, waved me over. We sat by the window, sharing warm apple tart and cinnamon tea. She'd been the first to hire me to appraise antiques for a neighborhood fundraiser and the first to say, "You've got eyes that notice what others miss. Don't ever let anyone shut them." I told her briefly what happened at Thanksgiving. She didn't press for details, only said, "Blood isn't always family. Sometimes family is who you choose." That night, I came home late. The wind howled through my loft windows, but I didn't feel cold. I opened my journal and wrote, "No one can take away what you build with your own hands. I don't need them. I have myself and the people who truly see me." January arrived crisp and clear, full of quiet resolutions. I hung a sign in the gallery window. Antique Appraisal and Preservation class begins January 14, limited to 8 students. Within 3 days, the class was full. Among those enrolled were a 72-year-old woman obsessed with French porcelain, a retired history teacher, 2 college friends studying interior design, and a chef from Seattle planning a 19th century themed restaurant. During our first classes, we gathered around a walnut table salvaged from an abandoned church. I didn't lecture like a professor. I told stories, hidden carvings beneath Windsor chairs, the scent of 1920s shellac, a battered table once dismissed as junk, that turned out to be a rare post-colonial piece. Watching their eyes light up, I realized I wasn't just teaching, I was sharing a spark. Jasmine, meanwhile, ran the entire storefront while I taught, managing displays and learning how to date historical fabrics. One Friday afternoon, just after finishing a session on Brazilian mahogany, Jasmine handed me a green envelope tied with a ribbon. "Open it," she said, eyes shining. Inside was a hand-drawn proposal for expanding the back of the gallery into a preservation workshop and learning space. "We could host hands-on sessions," she said, "and if you agree, I'd love to turn this into a training center for young people." I studied her sketches and smiled. "Jasmine, you're dreaming big." "Because I learned from someone who dares to dream big," she replied. That evening, I called Ryan, my financial advisor. We decided to allocate $250,000, 0 cents from my investments, to start the Evergreen Fund, a scholarship for students passionate about heritage conservation and antique design. The only rule: a real-world project. By March, we'd received 43 applications from 11 states. The first recipient was Lina Martinez, 27, who'd left college because she couldn't afford tuition for woodworking conservation. She'd sent photos of pieces she'd restored and wrote, "I don't want to profit from what's new. I want to preserve the old, so future generations understand how their ancestors lived." When I called her, Lena burst into tears. "You have no idea. You just saved me from going back to working at a convenience store." Her words stayed with me for days. I hadn't saved anyone. I'd simply done what I once wished someone had done for me, believed in my passion when I had nothing else. By late April, the back of the gallery became the archive room, a space for workshops and exhibits. Some days people waited outside because there was standing room only. One evening, while restocking shelves, a woman stepped in. It was Amanda, my cousin who'd skipped family holidays for years. She'd moved to Seattle to teach ecology and timber frame restoration. "I heard about your class through a forum," she said, smiling. "I didn't realize it was you. You're doing something extraordinary." I invited her in, brewed mint tea, and we discussed collaborating on a course blending preservation with Pacific Northwest ecology. I used to think my world was 4 walls and antiques, but once I stopped waiting for family validation, I found people who valued what I did, and a voice that no longer trembled under judgment. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was living. Right, not because I had anything to prove, but because I'd found where I belonged. This year, for the first time in over 15 years, I was the one inviting. A week before Thanksgiving, I called home. Dad answered. "If you wanted, you could come to Portland this year. I'll cook. Just the 3 of us." There was a pause. Then Dad said, "Your mother would like that. No apologies, no blame. It was enough." On Thanksgiving Day, I welcomed them into Hartman and Heritage. Mom wore an olive green coat, hair pinned up, lips soft pink. Dad wore sunglasses and a baseball cap. Inside, Mom marveled at the gallery's beauty. Dad wandered, fingers grazing a walnut sideboard. "How old is this one?" he asked. "About 1815, I replied. "Pacific Northwest walnut, hand-joined." He nodded, quiet but softer than before. Upstairs, my loft glowed with oak cabinets and vintage lights. Dinner was rosemary chicken, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and pecan pie I'd baked that morning. Nothing extravagant, just food I wanted to share. We ate quietly, without tension. Dad asked about my classes. Mom shared neighborhood news. No one mentioned Daniel. No one brought up money. After dinner, I poured tea and handed Mom a small white box. "A gift," I said gently. Inside was a silver camellia brooch from the late 19th century. I'd found it at an auction because it matched the Evergreen Fund's emblem. "It's beautiful," Mom whispered, her hand trembling. "You know I always loved camellias." "I remember," I said. "You wore one on parent-teacher night." Mom blinked. "You still remember?" I remember I've learned that living true to yourself sometimes means standing alone, but it's worth every step. If my story resonates with you, share your thoughts below. Tell me, have you ever had to defend your dreams, even to family? I'd love to hear how you found your own voice, and if you're still searching, remember this: you don't owe anyone your silence or your success. Protect your boundaries, honor your passions, and keep building a life that reflects who you are. If you believe in this journey, subscribe and stay with me. Let's keep proving that quiet strength can change everything.